A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always. I'm pleased that you have joined us. This week we continue our discussion about that community that points to a very special time and space in the life of our guest, Gollop. He begins by speaking of a gentleman whose name dignifies the pavilion in the community. He proceeds to speak of the development of this cricket ground and its many success stories.
We had some persons who went on to do well in cricket. Of course, Wayne played for the West Indies, was an outstanding fast bowler. I recall Geoffrey Boycott saying that to him he was the most dangerous of all the West Indian fast bowlers of that great era. But at the BCL level, at the Cricket League, we formed a Cricket League team and we played in a patch cut out there between the fields of this very Edgecombe plantation, and then much later they moved to a slightly bigger area that was less burdened by the cane fields around it, granted to the area by Mr. Jeffrey Strong. And we've had a cricket league team which did very well, and that league team, we won the championship one year, and then this facility came along. Again, a gift by the Edgecombe plantation. Edgecombe and Bentley had then been amalgamated. And even though it is Bentley as we know it, the whole thing is called Edgecombe, because Edgecombe now consists of a number of plantations: Edgecombe, Bentley, Bideville, French's. And this field here was given over to the villagers for a sporting facility by Mr. Jeffrey Armstrong, who was a great humanitarian himself. And he liked cricket. He actually played cricket. I remember as a young boy seeing him keeping wickets for Windward Cricket Club. And this was developed to, as you see what it is now. The pavilion was built, constructed here, and officially opened in 1998 by Mr. Rudolph Cappy Greenwich, as he then was the Minister of Sport, and the pavilion is named after Wayne Daniel. But regrettably, the cricket has not continued to blossom as one would expect for an area with such a lovely facility. The BCL team, developed over time, and the club was admitted into the Cricket Association competition and has done very well up to now. We won. I'm a founder member of the club. We won the second division championship in 2008. Then we were repeat winners in 2016 and 2017. And then the club was invited to field a team in the intermediate division. So we moved from an ordinary cricket league team to one that have achieved some success as a second division BCA team, and then further development as an intermediate team. Now, regrettably, as I said, cricket has fallen off considerably, and the team has suffered as a result of its inability to attract new young members. And even though we've managed to keep the team going, the average age of that team is probably something like 45 now. There are no young fellas coming along who are sufficiently interested in cricket to really take advantage of this facility. I could imagine what persons who grew up in this village having to rely on places like the Marl Hole or the Gully to practice and develop their cricket skills would do with a facility like this. This village, or most, well, I've mentioned Wayne Daniel. Wayne wouldn't know anything about this, for example. Wayne was before this. Persons in my generation, of course, Marl Hole in the Gully. And we had the most popular of that generation would be a Francis Scott, who went to Combermere and left Combermere and joined Spartan. And then he played at umpire. Was a very, very classical style batsman and an off-spin bowler. And Francis lived just beyond the first house here. He lived at a house there right on the road. It is now demolished. That house was recently demolished. And he lived there. Now, there's a story about Scott. Of course, the fellas played cricket in the road. You only had to time the emergence from St. Philip of a few cars. P12, that was Mr. Francis at the dispensary, or Mr. D.D. Jarnett, P87, or a couple more. You only had to time when they had gone down the road to town, and then the road would be fully available to play cricket. And the fellas played cricket there in the road all day. And Francis Scott, would bat on the fellas and bat and bat and bat until the fellas go home for lunch. So you would hope to get back out to start again with a new batsman back crying because you said, I first or I second, you know. But Scott lived right on the road. And he would be there waiting for the fellas to come back out because you're not going to come and start a new batsman and you didn't get me out. And he would bat and bat and bat. But he was a fantastic batsman.
Cricket, lovely cricket. It's now all part of the sporting legacy of this community. No one would deny the fundamental role played by community churches back in those days. Hal Gollop pauses to honor the work of community churches.
Few other things which I think are of significance for the development of life in the village. There are a number of evangelical churches here in the village. There's right here the New Testament Church of God. Then less than 50 yards, there is the Church of God proper. Then there is, on the other extremity, at the eastern extremity, there's the Baptist Church. And that Baptist Church was one of 3 that were originally built in the mid-20th century. I believe they were founded by a lady called Miss Esther Brooke. And that Baptist Church on Constitution Road, there's a plaque there in memory of that lady. But there was the one which was a few yards from where I was born and brought up, called the Budlong Baptist Church. And it had 2 sister churches, one over in the St. Patrick's area called Packers Baptist Church. And then there was one over in the Rock Hall area called Cleveland. And there were those 3 churches there regularly contributing to the development, the spiritual development of the village. And there was also a church army hall from the parish church. One of those halls was built there just on the brow by the Star Block plant. That was destroyed during the hurricane of 1955, and it was never replaced. But those churches provided an immeasurable opportunity for the development of the villagers, and they contributed significantly. I mean, the persons of my generation would speak, of the influence of people like Sister Paris. She was the pastor of the New Testament Church. affectionately known to us as Sister P. That woman had a presence, and she had an influence on all of us in the village, even though we did not go to her church. That was the kind of reverence in which she was held by her church members, and even those who were not her church members. Then there was further up, there was the influence of her brother Farrell, who was the pastor of the Church of God. And that was the church I went to as a boy. And we would be engaged in all kinds of activity. And then there was the Baptist church up there, which in my early boyhood days was pastored by a number of foreign missionary people until it was handed over to local people. And I should like to mention particularly the name of Ezra Critchlow. Ezra was a young man in his teens when he virtually became a pastor in that church. And he played a remarkable role in the spiritual development of a number of young people in my generation, boys and girls, while he was there associated with that church. He eventually became a pastor at the church in Constitution Road. But Ezra was one of my mentors. Great fellow. Slightly older than we were, but displayed a sufficient level of leadership and had a certain amount of influence in the development of boys and girls who were of his own generation. And we went to Sunday school, of course. I myself, I wouldn't like to say fell victim, because that is in a pejorative sense. I myself had to attend 3 Sunday school every Sunday. I went to the Church of God Sunday school at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I went to the one at the Church Army, the church that was blew down in 1955 in the hurricane, at 3 o'clock. And then I moved from there up the road to the church that was nearest to me, the Budlong Baptist Church, for 4 o'clock. So 3 Sunday schools in one day. I really don't think that they did me any harm. Nothing that I would wish to complain about now. At Christmas, we would have these programs, and they were set out so that there was no clashing. The Church of God, for example, they always held their Christmas program on Christmas night. I don't remember which. The Baptist was the day after, but I don't remember when the New Testament held theirs. But recitations and young boys and girls going to the platform to recite what we call a piece, poem, recite a piece, or to sing a solo, or to take part in a little skit. Of course, a little piece of drama to depict the scenes of the shepherds and so on, and the wise men and so on. And those things had they had their benefit. They were useful things to be learned, as I said. And we all came through that. And you would recite your recitation, and you would give your salute, as the case may be, and you would be greeted by applause. At times too, the church was quite harsh in its criticism if you went up there and forgot your piece. I had to be prompted. If you were lucky enough to get over the prompting and come to the end of the piece, you did fairly well. But some people collapsed under the strain of the thing and had to be clapped down, as it were, which was quite harsh. But I don't think it did anybody any harm. It encouraged you to do better, to go and learn the thing better next time. But singing in the church choirs and things, there was the development of the choir. And at two of the churches, we developed two very good singing groups in the 60s. At that Church of God, the New Testament Church of God, there was a group of 7 young men called the Sevens, for example. And there were a cappella groups unaccompanied. And they sang 4-part harmony, gospel singing. And they influenced us further up the road at the Church of God to form a similar group. And we had 7 as well. And they called themselves the Sevens, and we called ourselves the Harmoniers. There's still, 3 or 4 of us now still alive from the Harmoniers. I believe the 7 still have most of their members alive. There's one member of that died, but they all emigrated after all. But we look forward to those occasions when the Sevens and the Harmoniers would perform, and we were fortunate that we had among those two groups persons who could read music. Music reading was a thing of a former generation. Even though a lot of them couldn't read the music, they could sing the solfa. And you would hear these fellas around the street singing the do, mi, sol, do, and that kind of thing, and singing it correctly. And they sang 4-part harmony and so on. But we had these two groups. Lyle Sargent, who was the leader of that Sevens, is still very much alive. And Lyle was had a remarkable bass voice. And he had with him a number of brothers from the Hunt family and other relatives of that family. And we had, on my side, I was studying music at Combamere in those days. By then I had acquired my O-level music at Combamere and could read music, and I was the leader of that group. So there was always spiritual development of some sort coming out of those churches. That New Testament Church of God, for example, we were doing a head count recently, and has produced a number of young pastors of this generation. And that could only have redounded to the benefit of the community. And we enjoyed the music, I could tell you. We enjoyed making that music. We used to import books with gospel songs, and we spent much time rehearsing them. As I said, we were unaccompanied, we were a cappella singers. So in that regard, we couldn't hide behind instruments in the background, noise of a guitar or a drum. It was harmony without accompaniment. But that was the influence which the church had on the village. One cannot weigh the value that having to sit and learn a piece could do for one's own development in memorizing things. Of course, the better you were at memorizing these verses and so on, the greater onus will be put on you by the pastor. He would give you a longer poem than somebody else who could only handle a two-verse thing. But it had its development. And it didn't matter, for example, whether you were a boy at Combamere or one of the other schools. You went to these churches and you were pastored, as it were, by people who did not have an opportunity, but who were solid intellects and who were people of some substance to give guidance, and you developed in the process. I have myself derived tremendous benefit from that kind of exposure. I've gone on to a career in music, 25 years of that, teacher of music and so on until I switched professions. But I still maintain my association with music through the piano and the organ. But it had its root in that little church there around the corner at the Church of God. In later years, I sang in the choir at St. Philip's Parish Church, at St. Michael's Cathedral, overseas in another church where I was studying overseas. But it all had its root there in this little village of Burton, going to Sunday school and attending church and benefiting from what those little churches in a very modest way had to offer. Modest, but important. But people are crying out that the influence of the church has lessened significantly. The influence of Sunday school is almost a thing of the past. As a matter of fact, it has been used to describe something of a different nature altogether. A pity about that. But I myself do not think that we can replace those useful lessons learned by going to Sunday school and attending church. And some of us, when we went to secondary school and became better informed, if you may call it, may at times find great fun in some of the sayings that came from the ordinary fellows, the laymen and the pastors and the brothers and the sisters in these churches. But they had their advantage. Those lessons had their advantage. Even though you may find some mirth in some witticism or something coming from one of these people, when you look back at what they were saying, those sayings were built on solid common sense and experience of living which those people benefited from. There was a Mr. Rowe, and he used to come to the Church of God when I was a young man there. He used to belong to another church over in French's over there by the mill somewhere there. But in his later years, he couldn't walk across, so he used to stop short at a Church of God. And I remember Brother Rowe saying to us, "Look, you young men, you've got to be careful. Don't be led astray. You can't prevent a bird from flying over your head, but you could prevent it from building a nest upon it, though." And I mean, that in itself, we laughed and we found it funny and amusing and so on. But reflecting on statements like that, there were statements built on solid philosophy, put in very simple terms, but pregnant with meaning. And I do not think, let me put it the other way, it is my view that there is not enough respect being given to elders by younger people who can well do with the advice that these old people are capable of giving. And that generation gap, there was always a generation gap, in my view, has become too stark. Even though there was a generation gap, there was a willingness to bridge the gap somewhat by saying, this man talking sense, what he's saying makes good sense. Even though you may find some mirth in it, you would not be dismissive to the extent of a foolish old man or a foolish old woman. I remember one evening too, an old lady going up to church. I was a little boy then, by the church up by me, and some boy in the crowd made a rude comment to her. I didn't hear what he said to her, but I heard this old lady say, "You go along. If you run fast, you're going to get home quick." No, it made no sense to me then, because I looked around to see where was he running. He wasn't running, nobody was running anywhere. It was only as I grew older and I realized what she was meaning, what she meant by that comment. If you're rushing to grow up fast, you know what it is. You may run into some kind of disaster. But as I said, the generation gap was always there. But there was always a willingness to take to heart some advice being given by an older person. And regrettably, there seems to be less willingness in that regard nowadays by younger folk to listen to the advice of older folk. You see altercations developing between young people and mature people. That in the past was something unimaginable. You have altercation between a mature man and a little teenage boy. But it comes from that. It is a breakdown in the respect and general observance by younger people. Look, there's nothing new under the sun, really. Mankind, regardless of the age it comes along, has had to go through certain development stages as one group from one stage to another, from an infant to a junior to an adolescent to an adult, etc., etc. And that will always be the case. And there are useful lessons to be learned during that development. If somebody has had that development, has benefited from that development, it is easier for him to pass on an experience than for you to go having to suffer while trying to find that experience. And that is a lesson which I think younger people can learn and which they can well benefit from.
Interestingly enough, this series, My Community, came about after a call from Prime Minister Motley for there to be a recommitment to the values that made us who we are today. Thank you very much, Mr. Gollop. The series continues next week at the same time. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Be good to yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.